Hey guys, what's going on? This is X. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about Vanguard overdress set 5 Triumphant Return to Brave Heroes. I actually thought I originally did something about this set, but apparently I did not. I just realized because I only talked about Ava in terms of like that Ava prison thing, but I never actually talked about my full thoughts on set 5 as a whole. And what better way to actually kind of discuss it than to kind of do like a mini review of sorts, especially since it's coming out, I believe by the time this goes up will be like the release day or so. I don't know when it's gonna go up, but it'll be here, and just give my own personal thoughts on the set 5 in terms of its cards, where I think it could go, and all the other stuff you know me for, which you don't know me at all because only like so many of y'all subscribe. So let's get the shilling out the way first before we move on. Please like, comment, subscribe so that we can actually like get this to 100 subscribers before the end of the year. That's just a small goal. Let's do it. Alright, so let's kind of talk about it. Alright, so here's how we're gonna do this. First off, we're going to talk about the encounter cards that come in this set. Then we're going to talk about the set 5 ridelines, the Craycross epic ones. And then we're going to finish off with the actual overall thoughts on the set itself. So first off, we're going to talk about Dragon Goldlord the End and his support card Burning Horn Dragon, or rather the 10th anniversary one. Dragon Goldlord the End, for those of you who don't know, is a card from the original era of Vanguard, which was released in its original set 5, which is kind of the whole thing about these encounters, is they were pretty powerful units that were released in set 5, critical to like the anime's conclusion, all the stuff that comes with that. And so they've been retrained again in D series for the encounter cards to support the original ride lines that came in set 2. This is the first time in overdress that these ride lines have had direct support since their original release in set 2. So with that, we're going to kind of talk about Dragon Goldlord at the End and my thoughts. I'm not really going to go over the skill. It's already on the screen. I made sure that I got the English translations or not. If not, you can always go to the wiki or the actual Vanguard. You can always go to the wiki or the actual Vanguard website to kind of get the skill for yourself, to read it over and whatnot, in case you can't see it for whatever reason. Either the video is trash or whatnot. But we're going to talk about the actual Overlord and Burning Horn. For me, the positives come with Dragon Goldlord the End does not need to hit in order to restand. A lot of the issues with the original Overlord is what usually happens with the original Overlord, especially when you get later into the power creep of the game, is Dragon Goldlord having to hit is now like, it's on hit pressure to restand, but now it's based on what your opponent wants to do. If your opponent feels they can kind of dupe you out of some value, they'll let you hit. Otherwise, they're just going to block it and move on with their day. So having the end's ability to just attack and then restand for free means that, not restand for free, cause counter blast and 2 cards in your hand. But it's like, you know what I mean. It's just it doesn't need to hit. It gets the restand regardless, and you can actually keep moving your turn, etc., etc. So that's one thing. The second thing is Burning Horn is a very good support card, being able to give a much needed consistency boost to the deck so that you can actually search for more Dragon Goldlords, either the original or Dote, if you want to decide to just go Overlord into Dote and have 4 Dotes only and just put the rest of the cards as like good support cards. So this makes everything just like, it really adds to consistency, and its ability to just kind of get power, become a 20k beater when you hit the end, 15k if on any other turn, is it's a good beater. And its ability to just refund itself if you don't find an Overlord is good too. And lastly, of kind of like my main points. Turn 5 is basically the end of the game. I really don't know how. If I will say this, if you're at a point where you're at turn 5, you hit everything about the end. You've hit the original Overlord turn 3. You've hit the end on turn 4, and you've hit a Persona ride on turn 5. Unless you were that far behind, turn 5 is basically like the end of the game. If you make it turn 5, you should at least see like you should be like on a winning position by the end of that turn. Because of the first skill, so long as you have Dragon Over Soul, you don't lose drives. You gain another 15,500 power, and then you just keep on swinging. That's 4 attacks, a big restand. You have one of the strongest over triggers offensively in terms of the Dragon Empire over trigger. So that is, in a way, just straight up a bunch of value that should pretty much end the game. So unless your opponent was just, so unless you were in a losing position, turn 5 is pretty much a straight up win. But there are obviously negatives to this as well. First off, it's still a turn 4 deck, I guess you could say. Dragon Glower is turn 3, but like I said earlier, it needing to hit doesn't really help the deck doesn't really help in the grand scheme of things. So having the end there means turn 4 is pretty much your thing. And from what I've seen, a lot of people are just running the original Dragon Overlord to actually still get the value. Understandable. Secondly, this is kind of like, this is going to be a recurring issue for a lot of these ridelines as we're gonna go forward, especially when we get to the encounters. But rear guards aren't really that majorly impactful. Yes, Burning Heart is good, but outside of that, Dragon Overlord, or rather Dragon Empire as a whole, doesn't really have a lot of powerful generic rears. You have some crazy stuff, right? You can still put in the overdress combo if you want for like the grade 2 that allows you just like pot of greed itself. But outside of that, there's very rarely like any like good rears for Overlord to really take advantage of. And kind of my final point is also that it has most of the issues that the original Dragon Overlord has. Those issues are kind of like patched up thanks to the cross ride ability and not being able to hit, but there are it does have some of those other issues that the original Dragon Overlord build has. So it is pretty much just still turn 4 reliant, because you need that Persona ride or the end itself. I talk about turn 5, but most of these decks in the metagame pretty much just kind of beat it in before that you get to that point. So that's why I say like turn 5, unless you're in a very hard losing position, should be like a win. But I guess it kind of like contradicts myself by saying like, oh, you should be there, but these other decks are kind of like being behind. So that's kind of it. Okay, so next up we have Majesty Lord Blaster and the ride line, but primarily we're going to talk about its new, and I say new with like a quotation marks because it's like the 11th version of Blaster Blade we've had. But yeah, our new Majesty Lord Blaster and Blaster Blade. So I'm going to go over the positives, and this is kind of like an odd one. So I'd say this is probably one of the best versions of Blaster Blade that an MLB deck has gotten in a while, because the original was terrible, but it was only good in like later stages because of legacy support, kind of like Dark Magician. The V series one was decent, but it also kind of wasn't like all the way there. But like this is kind of like the one where I'm just like, you know what, this is actually probably one of the better versions, just off of it being, yeah. I don't really have much to say. It's Blaster Blade. What do you want me to say? It retires things in a clan that's meant to be straight up just a call stuff and go face deck. So yeah, there's only so much I can really say. Like, you draw a card if you're on Vanguard, that's dope. So cool. So that's one thing. Like this version of Blaster Blade is really good, and I can say premium applications can be really good for it. So another thing is this deck is also has its consistency to see Blaster Blade and Blaster Dark because it will have triple drive, and it will have the order it has. I didn't put it on screen because there's so much room, and I think at the time I did these slides, like, I just didn't want to do all the extra work for it. So you're gonna have to live with it. And then also, it is continuously 15k base as long as you have Blaster Blade and Blaster Dark in your soul, barring some shenanigans with removing soul, aka prison. But you know, having 15k is really good defensively. Just means your opponent's Vanguard now has to actually have a booster. They have to commit a little bit more to try and get over, and makes numbers a bit wonky for him, which means easier numbers for you to hopefully guard. So that's one thing. That's pretty much all the positives, because its negatives are kind of like, I have like a lot more negatives to say about this than anything. First off, it's stuck with 3 attacks. Now, I'll talk about this like in another video, but I always say, like, it doesn't always mean 3 attacks are like bad. It just means that they have to do something extra to kind of like make up for it. Unfortunately, this deck doesn't really do that. It also has kind of this issue of it doesn't really have any finishing power. Like, yeah, it has 15k and a crit innately, but you don't get any other power anywhere else. You get only an additional drive. Your only like real source of power gain is Persona Ride. So I don't know where you're trying to go end the game off of, just besides just like punching me in the face with attrition, and all the other like decks that have triple dive innately, you know, the set 4 ones, just do that better. Bruce literally can just do that and still kind of like finish you off faster. And you know, I did say finding Blaster Blade and Blaster Dark is consistent, but they also have to be in a rotation to make sure that the deck can even still work, because it doesn't get the drive and the retires just innately. You have to have, at the very least, Blaster Dark on your rear as much as possible to put into the soul and get drive +1. Otherwise, you're not really going to, you're not really going to have that much pressure. Also, kind of because of it, Blaster Dark itself is also kind of a vanilla card. You know, its retire skill is very much kind of similar to Blaster Blades, except you have to retire one of your own units as well. And while yes, it does get 5k power by retiring, in a deck that's not really based off of hard retiring your own units, that kind of won't hurt you that much. So it's very rarely a skill. So otherwise, like, Blaster Blade and Blaster Dark kind of just vanillas. So to me, this is kind of a disappointment. This is probably like one of the weaker versions of MLB I've seen. I think the V Series one is probably the best version that's been released since this original concept. And there's also a promo that like Blasters got in Japan right now. We don't know when it's gonna get it here in the West, but even then, I'm not sure how strong like that promo has to go for it. And last but certainly not least on the encounters, we have Phantom Blaster Overlord with its main support cards, Skull Witch Nemain. I gotta say, out of all these, honestly, I like Phantom Blaster Overlord the best out of the 3 encounters that came out the set, for a couple reasons. First off, Nemain is probably the best card in the set. Just full stop. It pretty much is. Having just being having it being a 10k for the first time in his life, when it actually like on your turn, meaning it's not just a wet noodle, meaning she's just not a wet fart just like sitting there while doing nothing. She can actually attack basically, so long as she has a blaster in the card name, which is already good. Then her on-play skill is just straight up fantastic for, especially in premium, where it's just canvas 1, put a card from your hand, soul, draw 2. And guess which deck likes having a card into the soul for specific reasons? Starts with an L, which is what you're going to be taking. So the main's just really great. Secondly, the skill is just way better than the original Blaster Dark. It actually has a multi-attack engine to make Blaster Dark kind of useful. And not only that, Blaster Dark also gains power as well. So it's like that skill that was useless in MLB is actually useful here. Wow, who would have thought? And also, just because of the main, you have actual crit pressure early as turn 3 if you put Overlord into your right deck and just max out at 4 copies of PBD in your main deck and just hopefully draw it and shove in the soul in the main. So simply just, it's pretty much the most, I guess you could say, complete out of these 3. But, you know, so I like that a lot. There are some issues, of course. First off, having Blaster Dark in your solo drop is important. So, you know, in case Prison comes and like steals your Blaster Darks for some reason, yeah, you're kind of screwed there. Yeah, you're gonna notice that kind of like a big issue is Prison, and I wish Prison was bad again. But first off, like, you have Blaster Dark and solo drop. If you don't have any of those, and not even from hand, like another card from later we'll talk about, but you know, solo drop, you have to have it there. Also, and I talked about PBO, when I talk about PBO against crit power, that means if you want full power, you have to run 4 Phantom Blaster Dragon, which is literally useless. PBD is probably like one of the worst cards from set 2, and now you if you want the crit, it's kind of necessary. You don't have to run it. Honestly, you don't have to run if you just feel like you don't think the crit's necessary or warranted. But if you do, you either have to put in your right deck, I mean, you now waste a turn on a terrible boss and search for the actual good card, or you have to just hard draw it in your deck. But thankfully the main fixes that. And you know, the last thing is, like, eventually, like, you will kind of run out of retires to actually like get your stuff in. So yeah, I mean, I still think the deck is probably the best out of the 3 encounters. Probably one of the best decks in the set, honestly. But you know, it has its positives and negatives here and there. Alright, so moving on to the counters. First off, we have our grade 3 for Brantgate, Found Knowledge Ava, and her boy toy, Knight of Blackness Obscudate. I think that's how you pronounce it. But I put Ava first because, if I'm going to be honest, she and the next card we're going to talk about later are probably the 2 weakest in the entire set in terms of raw power. However, I think Ava is probably worse for a couple reasons. But first off, let's get to her positives. First off, the deck is flexible, and I mean in terms of it is able to use the other like orders that Brantgate has in its ridelines. So if you want to do like a Ava Prison, which I've shown on my channel before, you can do that. If you want to do Gravidia Ava, you can do that as well. You know, Meteor Ava. If you want to do Shadow Army Ava, you can also do that as well. Any other right line that comes with set orders, Ava has that flexibility to do so because of the ability of Obfuscate. Which, speaking of Obfuscate, it has probably one of the biggest beaters in terms of just being a 23k beater if you have 3 set orders. So that means like I've seen a couple of lists in Brantgate, more so Gravidia, actually kind of run a couple copies just because it's just a big beater, and you know, in that deck you really need all your space for your meteors. So having Obfuscate really helps. So, and then also the continuous of Rare Guardian Circle gets Intercept and 10k shield means that it has defensive options, which is really necessary because when we get to the negatives, straight up Obfuscate is pretty much his biggest defense and its biggest offense. You really just need to Obfuscate around any position to call it back in order to really keep pressure. Having that crit is pretty much like that crit is pretty much underrated, but only because it's the only way Ava can really hit you with anything. 23k, 30k on Persona Ride with an extra crit, you know, was pretty powerful on 4 attacks. So you already have an Obfuscate. If you have an Obfuscate It doesn't really get the crit without, you have to call it. It gets a crit on your 4th attack. Combine that with the Vanguard overtrigger, meaning you have just a bunch of crit and power to gain it. It's a really powerful has a really powerful interaction with the Vanguard overtrigger that is just wild. But outside of that, that's pretty much Ava's real push of pressure, because we'll get to that in a second. But the second point is everything involving the research orders sucks. And I'm going on a tangent here. Let's just talk about the actual order itself, and more so not just the order itself, but what was lacking in not only this order but also the set as a whole for Ava. First off, the order itself is not great. It is a activate, which in orders usually is a -1, just off the fact that it doesn't really give you any like field advantage in terms of like board control and everything. Vanguard is kind of weird in that sense, so it's already a -1 just off that. Then it has a skill of when placed, you draw and drop, which, okay, good to cycle and try and get more orders, but because you can only play 1 a turn, it doesn't really fit that either. Then you also have to add in the fact that it doesn't really have a payoff until turn 4 at the earliest, by having, at least if you're using pure Ava, by just being a grade 2. That's another issue. There's only one order in the set that's a research order, and it's a grade 2 order, meaning the grade 1 order, which the grade 1 in the ride deck, which searches your order, can't even use it until grade 2. So you're already a turn behind of what should actually gain this value. And then its final skill is when you have 3, you just Soul Blast 1 to bind the card on your opponent's field. There's no real payoff for the actual order. So it really just comes off as like you bottleneck this deck for no reason. And I just don't, it just doesn't make sense. It does not make sense to me. So it's already have that. Then Ava's Axe skill requires the research orders in your order zone. So turn 2, you only look top 2. Then turn 4, you look at top 3 if you're lucky. And you add a card, and it gets 5k. Woohoo! For a counterblast, which it already like has some issues with counterblast too. Thankfully, Brancade has like multiple counter chargers, but even still, it's still just, it's a lot. It's a lot of things, just like more, how do you say, restrictive. There are a lot more restrictive things with Ava that shouldn't be there, and it's weird. So that's another issue. And then the final issue with Ava herself is just straight up, there's very limited generic rearguard support in this set, and anything else just is not there. Your best card is your draw and drop, which combines with the penguin monster to search for orders. That's your best combo, that's your best play, and that's it. Outside of that, you don't really have a lot of value from your rear guards, which is weird because it seems like Ava needs those rear guards. So hopefully, like in the future sets, it actually gets something. Alright, and so like I said in the Ava portion, if Ava wasn't the worst deck in the set, I'd argue Chaos would probably be the next runner up. And I only kind of put Chaos in here because of a couple reasons. And first off, the reason is just straight up, its first skill, its axe skill, is really powerful. Just straight up check top 3, add 1 to hand, 1 to call rear, and put the rest in soul, is effectively what a hard, for if you included this card, it is effectively a hard +1 that gets your actual engine running, which is really good, straight up. And then its second skill does say when you have it at full power, it's just a free power up to the whole board. Like, that's just crazy. And I give it the kind of the honorary title of you have the most potential in the set, and that's in quotation marks. And you're probably wondering, well, what does the most potential mean? And that's really because Chaos is effectively a Highlander deck. And if you know anything from Highlander in terms of looking at V series and how Prism does it, how Reindeer does it, is Highlander can have some pretty powerful cards come together in a clan or a nation and just make a deck out of it. Just really create something powerful. And that's always nice. And so that's always why I say like Chaos has the most potential, because as Dark States gets more and more support, it can always become stronger and eventually get to that point. But outside of that, there's not really much here. So if we move on to the negatives, the payoff for Chaos's second skill, which is, you know, when it attacks, if you have 8 or more, give plus 10k to card, or if it's 13 or more, your front row, all your rear guards get plus 10. So that's 20k to each line. It's a strong effect. I think I was trying to figure out what I was trying to say there. It was a strong effect, but it's not strong enough for the payoff necessary at the very least right now, because that requires a lot of work that Dark States as a nation does not have the support necessary to supplement. So that's really the whole thing. It's not worth it to make all that issues right now. You'd be better off just taking the Chaos support, putting it into Barrel Magnus, and just do anything else. So also, you know, I kind of also went on a little bit of the third state I have here, but it's pretty much the same thing as talk about it more. Dark State's card pool is pretty much locked to either Final Rush / Bruce or anything. Yeah, it's pretty much anything locked to Greedon or Barrel Magnus. So it has very rarely any like generic support. You do have some support cards, but this is a Highlander deck as well, which also carves its like available pool even less. So it has the issue. It has a lot of issues that will eventually get cleared up with time, depending on if Bushiroad is willing to let Dark States go wild a little bit. And then its final kind of point, I kind of skimmed over to get to this point, but here we are now, is Mikani, his generic skill, which is the Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1, you pop a card that has the soul thing. It conflicts with the game plan, right? Chaos needs 13 different cards in Soul to activate its full effect. Mikani taking a card out of Soul, if it's not if you need to really take rid of something on the board, if it's not like an extra, say, like extra thing you've already soul charged, which, you know, this is a Highlander deck, you don't really have that, it now means you've taken a card out your pool to make your deck work. Bakani's second skill is really powerful because it's the only way you're going to get multiple attacks out of this, and he goes to the soul, so he feeds back into that. But outside of that, like, the generic effect doesn't really work for him. It's probably one of the worst generic effects out of these 5, but it's it's kind of weird. So I say right now, like, if Ava wasn't the worst one right now, I think Chaos would be, you know, the second most thing. I think really like why Chaos is a weaker price, at least at the time of this recording, than Ava is simply because Chaos is a guy, Ava is literally wearing a bikini and almost nothing else. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So next up we have Aurora and his support card, Raylina. So Aurora is pretty interesting because this is the first time in Standard that we've got not just a new Nectar class like main grade 3 boss, but also a token focused one that brings back plant tokens. I mean, obviously makes sense because lore wise he is from 3,000 years ago, so yeah, plant tokens existed back. But we have some actually pretty decent ideas here. So first off, we start with the positives. Pretty strong early game rush. He creates tokens like crazy. One of the big things that really did give a lot of like benefit for early Neo Nectar back in V was straight up like the amount of like card advantage it could create just off of the plant tokens. So with that being the case, just straight up its early game offensive power is really good. Secondly, the defensive skill is actually a nice one because it does something with those plant tokens on your opponent's turn, turning them into more shield value, per se, so that they're not just clogging up the board. And lastly, because of Raylina's glitter effect combined with the token, it actually becomes an innate 4 attack deck. You know, there's 3 front row, and then the token attacks for 4, so it actually becomes an innate 4 attack deck without really any other like outside support. You know, that's really good. So its negatives are pretty much just no other reward for the plant tokens. Like outside of the defensive skill, there's nothing else that does anything really different with the plant tokens. So, you know, another, you know, combining with like Neo Nectar and looking in terms of actual like comparison, Neo Nectar also had, when it was strongest, was when it turned those plant tokens into something. Right now, Aurora does not do that, and that's kind of the big issue. It does turn into more power for the tokens of the dragon tokens ability, but outside of that, not much there. And its other like big issue is really it doesn't do anything special. You know, I talk about its early game rush. However, when it comes to actually finishing games, it rarely does that. And by turn 4, Magnolia is just innately better. It doesn't really do anything special in terms of, it does something special in terms of standard, but we're talking about like all of Vanguard, doesn't really do anything special there. Magnolia gets 6 attacks post turn 4. Zorga has its Alchemy Magic shenanigans to go through, and Flagberg has more attacks, more value gain, etc., etc. So it doesn't really do anything special to stand out from the rest of the decks, and that's why it's just kind of there. Alright, so next up is Dagria, both light and dark Dagria, as well as Maple. So if we're going to talk about it, let's kind of wrap this up quickly. First off, the positives with the deck itself, because the first skill, Persona Ride, is always active, meaning so long as you, regardless if you re-ride light Dagria, it's light Dagria, dark Dagria to dark Dagria, or light into dark, and vice versa, you're always getting Persona Ride. So that's always really good, because that's one of the biggest issues with Persona Ride, is that if you want to ride a different boss, you lose out on Persona Ride. You know, if you want to switch things up, you kind of lose that power buff. So Dagria mitigates that just off the fact of its mechanic, which is really fun. Secondly, Maple is just really good generic revival. So long as you don't have a Maple, you put it back there and you get another card on board. So if you want to use it for Dagria, Shadow Dagria's pop 2, you can do that as well. You really just only pop 1 just off the bat. Not to mention, Maple also has her recycle skill, which is really good too. And lastly, a pretty cheap restander, and has some really nice, a pretty cheap like multi-attack as well, just off the bat. Mostly because its real gimmick is having to switch in and out of them. So, you know, obviously you'd want, you know, obviously the whole point of it is just straight up to read things and that. So of course, off that you would, I don't know what I just said. So let me restart this right now so I can actually continue right there, because I really need to, of course, obviously need a bit more time. But it's cheaper because you have to recycle in. It's only on place, and you have to get the cards, so obviously it's going to be much more cheaper than most other restands or most other forms of multi-attack. So that's really good, and that's pretty much all for its positives. But it does have some negatives though. It's probably one of the better cards, one of the better decks in the set, but it does have some negatives. Namely, as I said before, you need to cycle through each version. Right, you only really have couple searches in your main ride line, but after that, you need to find a way to get another version that you need in order to actually activate its effect. Maple does help with this, but outside of that, you really need to make sure you get them. Which, you know, it really depends. And this does not help off the fact that it had similar issues with Chaos, just straight up. But not as bad. Well, Chaos, but mostly like all the other kind of decks here, is that for so long, overdress as a game, or as like a as sets rolled out, really only supported specific decks primarily, and all of its generic stuff was either really, really good or just really, really bad. I'm not gonna lie. Thankfully, Keter does have some really good generic stuff that can get you there, so its card pool is actually a bit stronger. Pretty much, it's a pretty good deck. There's only real issue is pretty much just getting more searching to make sure you cycle through your light and darkness switches as often. And last but not least, we are finally on the last deck, which is, if we've gone through the whole rotation, means this is the best deck out of the entire set, in my opinion. Tamayura with the twin Diver Dolls, Ramami and Rubami. I think I just butchered that because of my pronunciation, but here we go. So, pretty much, this is probably easily the best deck, just off the fact that it has a lot of things going for it. First off, its Fox Art order is pretty much just straight up Shiryuki, which, if you play V, you know how strong Shiryuki was for a long time, just because of the offensive power it gave you. And, well, it has that ability, not to mention that it's also searchable, meaning just straight up you get a free Shiryuki in a format that desperately needs Shiryuki or Shiryuki-like skills. So Tamayura already gets a bump in the defensive bump in defense, very similar to Aurora, but arguably much better. Arguably, it is much better, excuse me. So, next, second skill, 4 or 5 attacks depending on setup. Just straight up a Counter Blast 1, choose a card from your soul and card to rear. And the deck is based on pulling cards from your rear into the soul. Very similar to, like, Pale Moon and, other dark zone decks that really used it. So, it has that part kind of point to it. As well as turning to 5 attacks, you have both Rumi and Rawami on the board, in your soul, which means you just call them out, bam, you get 5 attacks, and then you just go crazy. And its last thing is, it's not as reliant on Persona Ride. Its first skill, giving a beginning of ride phase, all your front row gets plus 5k till end of turn, is really good. Which means that your Rumi and Rawami, when you call them out, just straight up have 15k, which can hit without themselves barring a defensive or any other type of shenanigans. So that's just already really good. Then you combine it with Persona Ride and they just hit hard. the dolls, the twins hit hard, just straight up, which is really good. Just straight up free power, multi-attack, defensives, just a all-around more competent deck than some of her alliance whatnot for other glitter allies. Not to say there aren't some negatives to the deck as well, but let's be honest here, this pretty much just only involves the twins. The twins, their generic skill is a bit too costly. Soul Blast 2 to either put a unit of soul or draw a card, which they're not bad skills, just right now they're currently too costly, as a lot of your soul will probably be for your Fox order, and pretty much just calling these 2 out anyway. So you don't really want to have any of your extra Rumi Rawamis go, because the second thing is it's hard to search for them. Outside of the ride line, you really get maybe one. You maybe only get one in your early thing, so you have to hard mulligan for them to make sure you have them. So, I'd say it's very easy to recycle them, but to get to them is another story entirely. But pretty much just there's very really little very rarely any flaws in this deck, which I think is just kind of a testament to how strong it is. Right. And that's it. That is all of set 5's kind of major bits and pieces of the deck. So I guess the question would be, what do I think of the set? And well, I want to kind of preface by kind of saying, well, to me, what I think of the set is, it's not a set that's meant to be just straight up a banger set. And what I mean by that is, it's a set that's pretty much designed, in my opinion, to kind of do a few things. One, it's meant to kind of be a 10th anniversary set, of course. It's meant to be nostalgia bait for a lot of people. That's why MLB is in here. That's why PBO is in here. That's why They're Gonna Go Over the End is here. They're here because the encounters were already created, and they need to do something with the encounters, as well as do something for the 10th anniversary of Vanguard. You know, hey, we made it 10 years. Most card games can't say that, right? If you looked up the amount of card games that have passed away in between Vanguard's original concept and now, there'd be a list almost as you could literally have like a giant like list, a memorial just straight up with all the card game names. That's how much have died in 10 years with Vanguard. So with that, is one meant to be this nostalgia, and this is kind of like one of the few times where you're allowed nostalgia, so I'll allow it. But secondly, it's also meant to kind of be like a secondary set to kind of like help people get in. And now I know that set 6 is coming around the way with 3 trial decks and probably some more ridelines in set itself meant to do it, but this is more so meant to be kind of like a first stop. It's like, hey, here's a whole new set independent from the other like sets went before, which have a year's support. Here's a soft little reboot for people to come in and like pick up a deck that probably will get more support later, which I do think these decks are going to get more support, and I'll talk about that in a second. But it pretty much is another like stopgap, like, hey, bring more people into the game. Let's see, you know, if you want to join in, use these encounter ride lines and just come in, pick up a deck, and let's have fun. So that's another thing. So in that note, in terms of nostalgia, that's like an 8 out of 10. But for tons of like, you know, just getting people to the game, in terms of like having like a ride line where you just pick up that's independent from the others, I think that's also good too. However, I think kind of the issue is some of these decks do not feel complete. You know, I talk about Ava and Chaos, they don't feel complete. Ava feels like it's missing an order that desperately needs. It feels like there's something missing in its whole. I mean, not in its whole. Oh my god, I meant like as in not in its whole, as in like a hole in the deck where a gray 1 order would vastly like improve this deck and to make it actually like a good start for going. Chaos needs a lot of support, but that's more with time. That's everything. Aurora just feels like it needs a actual payoff for the orders that isn't just its defensive skill. That could do something with, you know, that could be, I'll talk about that in a second later. But then you also have Dagria, which, you know, needs some grade 3 searches, which, you know, thankfully Cater has been all grade 3 searches, so we'll let you get there. And then Tamayura is pretty much the most complete one, but I don't know what it's going to do to kind of like increase that deck's actual ceiling. So this is kind of negative too. I don't know where that deck could go because it is the most complete out the box, but I don't know what else it could do. So I say this also to say that another good thing I say about the set is straight up, it does not have the issues that like set 2 and set 3 for overdress have. And what that means is a lot of those cards were specifically designed to work with the main boss, you know, the grade 3 boss of the ride lines or of, you know, etc, right? There's cards that specifically need Hexa Orb. There's cards that specifically need the grade 3 Nirvana, not Mahar Nirvana, or a Nirvana in general, or needs Seraph Snow or Magnolia regular, you know, etc, or just regular Bruce. But, you know, when set 4 came out and these grade 4s came out that had different names, they could not actually straight up actually use those support cards, so they got replaced or have some different build to compensate for that. So that being, you know, so that's kind of like sucks. So that makes those other sets lose value. This is different because this actually has kind of rectified that situation by saying, if there's another Ava, if there's another Research Order, if there's another Alpha Skate, if there's another Aurora, another Chaos, another, you know, another like glitter boss, another dual nation card, another specific card tied to the deck itself, it can work with those cards, meaning that they have value later on in in the lifespan of the game. So that's my big like hope for them, is that they get cards that like really impact the deck themselves. That also means they could potentially switch nations as well because of the the way glitter works. And that would be pretty cool and interesting, and that adds more space for these decks to get better and whatnot. So I say there's a lot of potential in these decks, but only time will really tell if they're going to get the support they need to actually come forth and be better. Yeah, that's pretty much all my thoughts on set 5. Can't wait for set 6 and more information coming out soon. Thank y'all for dealing with me, because this kind of took a long while to make. A lot of things happen in the process, as well as me being a giant procrastinator. So that being said, thank y'all for tuning in. I'm asking you again to just like the video, comment. Hey, tell me what you think of set 5, and if you have any faith in these decks getting more support in the future or not. And then like, comment, subscribe, and y'all have a nice day. Bye bye.